All right, welcome to the next episode of the Opposite of Infantry. I'm Kevin Crowsyn, and I am fortunate to have Dan McCall, a fellow University of Florida Gator, as well as a Army veteran and experienced recruiter in the veteran space. Appreciate you coming on and supporting the show and sharing some stories here with today.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. And if you can hear me, great. I got about maybe a sentence of what you said earlier.
That's right. I'm hearing you great. So if you can hear me, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, both with the military and also what you've been up to since getting out.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Hey, Kevin, thanks for inviting me on, and go Gators. So, a little bit about myself. I was a University of Florida graduate and ROTC student with the Army ROTC department, and spent 8 years active duty Army as an air defense artillery officer. I did 2 combat deployments, one to Afghanistan, one to Iraq, and then my last year in the Army may have been the hardest year of all, which was a year at the Joint Readiness Training Center. And so after a year there, it was definitely time to leave the Army. And so I started looking for jobs, and I thought, well, everyone would want to hire me because I'm an Army captain and I think I'm pretty good. And after about 2 months of crickets, I realized maybe I needed some help. So back in the day, we used to get letters in the mail from these headhunting firms and just would throw them in the trash. They were very generic. Second Lieutenant Alpha Battery was the address line, but I figured, hey, maybe I need some help here. So I found the letter that was in the biggest envelope that was sent. I said, well, that one must be really important because it's in a big legal size envelope. So I'll answer this one.
Sure.
And sent everything back in hard copies. We're talking about, this is a long time ago, right? But a couple weeks later, I get an email and set up a meeting. And a month later, I had 6 or 7 interviews. And so I asked the recruiter, I said, hey, I'm interested in doing what you're doing. I really feel like helping other veterans who are in the job search and are struggling like I have struggled would be a good job. And so I said, yeah, sure, interview. It would not have been my first choice. At the time, I really thought I wanted to be a pharmaceutical sales rep. I would later find out I wasn't pretty enough to do that job. And so I figured what that recruiting job was, most of it was on the phone. So it doesn't matter that I'm not pretty. I can probably do that job, and got lucky enough to get hired. And I've done recruiting in the transitioning military and military space since 2005. So I'm a little over 19 years.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So I bet you've definitely have a lot of lessons learned, and you have a great experience on the other side of service. So the first few episodes we've talked to currently in service or recently. So you'll be the first one that we've talked to that's kind of been out for a while and operating in this veteran space. So off the bat, when you hear the phrase the opposite of infantry, what does that kind of conjure up in your mind, given your experiences?
Yeah, I definitely can relate to it. I was an air defense officer in the 101st and the 82nd Airborne Divisions, and so commonly referred to as duck hunters. We were combat arms, kind of, in the testosterone filled 82nd and 101st Airborne Division. So yeah, it absolutely is something that I thought, yeah, I kind of understand where that's coming from. I've lived some of that.
Absolutely. So when you're in the grid that we've created with the high violence, high physical demand being in the upper left corner or upper right corner, and the low violence, low physical demand in the bottom left corner, where would you chart some of your experiences in the military?
Yeah, so I remember there used to be with some military graphics, if it was dotted line, it was kind of unknown,
Yeah.
right? It's unknown location.
Yeah.
So I would definitely say mine's probably a dotted, dotted line. I said it earlier, combat deployment. Well, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Combat deployment. I mean, it was a tough day in our combat zone if the internet didn't work.
Yeah.
And so never fired my M4 other than at the range the whole time I was deployed. So yeah, so I definitely see it as a dotted line somewhere, and probably in my mind more to the upper right, but in reality probably more towards the bottom left.
No. So you say, like, we say combat deployment. There's a lot of dispute of what that means. So I have the most blasphemous of all combat patches from Kuwait that in the sibling rivalry of the military is universally recognized as the one that doesn't count. But I think that's just part of the poking and teasing. There's a certain part of the culture that I think we accept and that we have fun with, but hopefully we don't cross the line too much. But I have fun with it. I own it. I know my patch is Kuwait, and my other deployment was Kosovo. I'm just like you. My weapon was locked up the whole time. I had air conditioning, so to me it was like, obviously it was fine. But when I tell like a civilian, like, oh man, yeah, I lived in a tent, they're like, "Oh, that must have sucked." I'm like, "No, it was AC. It's fine." Like, so you have that, but you at least have the combat arms street cred that I don't have. I'm just an admin reserve guy. So how was it
Yeah,
interfacing?
our combat air threat in Afghanistan and in Iraq was very light.
Yeah,
So when your primary weapon system, it consists of a Stinger missile, and there's absolutely zero chance of using your primary weapon system, you quickly figure out, yeah, we are not, yeah, we are not the primary effort right now. So
absolutely. So what were some of your engagements and interactions with kind of up and down? So you're in like the hierarchy of military badassery or awesomeness. Obviously, the non-combat MOSs would look up to you, even though you have a bona fide combat job, at least from logistics and HR and finance perspective. But from a infantry Cav Scout perspective, maybe not so much. So what are some experience that you've had kind of interfacing with both support elements as well as with the combat guys? Did they give you crap? Were you kind of locked in with the sibling rivalry of like, the support guys, or did they treat you as equals as fellow combat troops? What was your experience kind of being in that limbo?
yeah, so I think starting off my experience is I just wanted to go to college.
Yeah.
And so, having college paid for and having a scholarship, because I was definitely too small and too slow to play big time college football at the University of Florida. So how else do you get college paid for? Well, hey, this Army ROTC scholarship looks pretty good. I really had no idea what the different branches were. And even by the time I'm a junior or senior and you're making these decisions, I really didn't know very much, especially looking back. I knew nothing
Mm.
about the choices I was making. I chose air defense, or at least I put it in my top three, which pretty much means you chose air
Yeah.
defense or air defense chose you.
Mhm.
So needs of the Army dictated that. But I definitely knew at the time, I thought, that infantry stuff doesn't sound like it would be fun. That infantry stuff sounds like it's a lot of hard work. I don't know that I'm that excited about the infantry lifestyle. So I chose an air defense MOS or air defense, and the first time was the 101st, and I just wanted to be close to Nashville. My wife's family was in Missouri, and
Mhm.
that would be great. And so again, didn't really choose the 101st for any history, or it's one of the most lethal divisions that the Army has when you think about the attack aircraft platform. And I didn't know much of anything. I just show up there. So, but I quickly realized, as a air defense officer in an infantry division, where you're having to go to senior officers that are at infantry battalion or brigade level, and communicate what your battlefield operating system is, that if you don't do that well, you're going to get kicked out.
Oh yeah.
And you already have a deck stacked against you. Now, I somehow got the idea that going to Ranger school might be a good idea and failed out very early of Ranger school. I think I batted about 500 with my Army schools, where I failed as many as I passed.
There you go.
And Ranger school would be a three time failure for me. And so if you're an officer in an infantry unit and you're not Ranger tab, you're fighting an uphill battle. But I also observed that the officers who were Ranger tab, they got one chance. And then when they said something stupid, they got thrown out as well.
Mm.
So my experience was, hey, it helps if you're infantry.
Mm-hmm.
It helps if you have a tab. But if you're good in your stuff
Mm-hmm.
and you can be confident and you can show some backbone, that resonates, that when you push back
Mm-hmm.
and you show that you're willing to fight, then that was my experience was, and I'll never forget telling an infantry major who came from a lineage in the 82nd that was amazing, and everyone was intimidated by him. And I remember telling him, sir, that is unacceptable.
Mm.
That this is happening. That is unacceptable. I cannot allow that to happen. And I remember him looking at me and going, okay, you're right. And that's the moment for me that it clicks, like, look, it doesn't matter what branch you are.
Mm-hmm.
It matters about who you are and having the confidence to stand there.
Absolutely. Did you ever have any so that was a positive experience that worked out. Were there any like negative kind of, I mean, even if just in the fun way, just our stepbrothers relationship, kind of the hazing or whatever. Is there any kind of moments that stood out to you that really stuck in your mind of like experiencing that elitism that can sometimes occur, sometimes in a fun way, sometimes in a not so fun way?
Yeah, I'll tell you the one that really does. I've had it, I've seen it, and it's much more recent.
Mhm.
So, being in the recruiting industry, we'll have companies that tell us, "Hey, here's what we're looking for.
Sure.
This is what we're looking to hire for," and some of it's very legitimate. Hey, we want the person to have a 4-year degree, or we want the degree to be in engineering, or we want them to have a master's degree. I even understand sometimes, hey, we're looking for an officer
Mhm.
for this position. And usually you can tell when the person who's giving you the requirements is former military, they start to, but the one that always makes me scratch my head is when they say, well, I want a combat arms officer.
Mhm. So what does that
You make
mean? That's
potato
really
chips.
broad.
Yeah, you make potato chips here.
Yeah.
Why do you think that you need a combat arms officer? I mean, is there actual warfighting operations going on that would require that? I mean, that seems a little odd to me,
Yeah.
you know,
Air
and
defense meet their
so
requirement?
I guess maybe depends who you're talking to, right? Maybe, but I would explain to, hey, look, in Afghanistan and Iraq, there were logistics units that did a lot more combat operations than I ever did,
Mhm.
because they were on the road.
Yeah.
They're the 88 mics in the time that I was in Afghanistan, they were probably seeing more action than a lot of the 11Bs, because the attacks were happening on the roads. They weren't attacking infantry units; they were attacking the logistics trains. They were IEDs and the ambushes for logistics. So for me, it's for a company and a hiring manager to come to me and say, "Well, I'm not interested in them because they're not combat arms." Well, one, why? And then two, that battlefield now is not linear like it used to be.
Yeah.
It's all encompassing. So I just thought it was a silly idea that somehow, one, that combat arms mattered, but then two, that somehow it it was even defined that way anymore.
Yeah, that does seem strange, especially in the civilian environment. That's one of the last places. Corporate America is not somewhere that someone that's currently serving that I would think that's happening at Fort Bragg, or I forget what they're calling it now. They renamed everything. That's something that I would envision
Don't get me
happening.
started on that,
Yeah,
please.
no.
We can't. We don't want to go down that
No.
road.
So, but that's something that as a current service member, I would think, oh yeah, that's something that happens internally. The fact that I wouldn't even envision or think that that sort of stuff would be happening on the civilian side in kind of the corporate side of things. So that's very interesting.
I've
Like,
seen it the other way too,
yeah,
where I've seen someone say, "Well, they're just infantry; they can't do this job." And I'll tell any young infantryman who tells me that, who says, "Well, I'm just infantry. What can I really do?" Bubby, just like that, you can do anything.
oh
I
yeah,
mean, you're infantry. I've seen you do everything.
oh
So
yeah,
I do. Yeah, I kidded in your post on LinkedIn about neither of the two candidates for vice president were airborne, so I called them both legs. I do look at
yeah,
people's when I see a resume, I see somebody has been in an airborne unit. I think there is some uniqueness to the airborne community that
sure,
I think you're fearless. If you're willing to jump out of an airplane, that shows that shows some confidence to me. And I also think of the ability to do things that are not planned. Things, are different. But is it airborne the only group that can do that? No.
no,
I think that exists for everybody. So to exclude somebody,
hmm,
from consideration just because they weren't airborne or
hmm,
weren't a ranger or weren't infantry. If they're good, they're good.
absolutely. I'd love to go further down this segue, especially with that. That's been your bread and butter for coming on 20 years. From an outsider perspective in terms of currently serving. So you're as you said, you're helping people come into. Is there any compare and contrast? Obviously, there's in terms of broad strokes, obviously each person is different. But for example, as you mentioned, if you see some airborne on someone's resume, okay, there might be some things that come to mind. So if someone who's just a career AG or admin, if they're enlisted, recruiter, finance, human resources, is there any broad strokes that you kind of see from your perspective that really contrast, like our upper right hand corner versus the lower left hand
Mhm.
corner?
Yeah, I think for me it's again it's silly,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
the silliness that you see.
Hmm.
Um, and the ones that I have pet peeves on sometimes are either on a resume or in an interview, and someone's maybe exaggerating a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, yeah, I'm special operations." Well, wait a second, are you really you're yeah, I'm an operator. You're psyops. That's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Let's,
Yeah.
uh, let's not make this look a little different because it makes you look better. Let's just be
Oh
honest.
yeah.
Yeah, let's not try to 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 put something on here that isn't true or
Hmm.
maybe is a little misleading.
Sure.
Be proud of what you did,
Absolutely.
and stand by it, but don't be misleading about it. And I check DD-214s. I
Hmm.
check OERs and NCOARs. I look for things. So part of my job is to verify and validate that the person who I'm recommending to a company has done what they say they're doing. And
Absolutely.
so if I see something on a resume and I don't see it on the DD-214 or on it doesn't make sense in the OER, if the timeline doesn't match up, I'm asking questions. Yeah,
Sure.
I want to know, hey, what's the real story here?
Hmm.
And you don't need to lie. You don't need to mislead. In
Yeah.
fact, that can hurt you in
Oh,
this
absolutely.
interview. So let's make sure that we're being honest.
Yeah. So one theme that I try to address in this is that I think a lot of, and it's something I've suffered from that I've kind of come to terms with and worked through, is the imposter syndrome. A lot of support element people, especially reserve, guard, or people that didn't deploy, there is an issue with this idea of imposter syndrome where maybe my service isn't good enough. Maybe I feel the need to church it up to make it seem like my service is worthwhile. Now, obviously, some people are just churching it up because they may want to sound cool, or they may want to sound qualified. So, looking at it from that perspective, how much of that do you think kind of bleeds on the line? Because obviously, like you said, we need to take pride in what we're doing. But for some people who
Mhm.
might be suffering from that, who might not be as confident in their service, and that might be a motivating factor to church up their resume, what would be your recommendations and kind of advice to people who are struggling with the lack of confidence or the lack of pride in their service because maybe they don't feel they were hardcore enough or did enough? What would be your guidance to those sorts of folks?
So I guess my first reaction to that would be the decision to leave the Army after 8 years, and having been a battery commander and having really been invested in by wonderful leaders. And that decision when I left, I was nervous about what would be said. I was so relieved when mentors and people that I really respected said, "Hey, you served your country, and 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 that's honorable, right?"
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you're not going to do 20 years, and you're not going to this, but don't feel bad. We're not going to make you feel bad about your decision to leave. And so, for anybody out there, if you served honorably and you have served honorably, you volunteered to serve, you made a decision, you gave time to your country, I would just start there and say thank you. And I would say that the people who I look at now and hold in highest regards and respect, it's the people who are humble. My early interviews were sometimes just train wrecks as I'm trying to, um, figure out how to interview. And when I figured out how to interview, I got cocky again. And I remember the advice of someone who was interviewing me, who was also former military. And he said, "Hey, slow your roll here. You're not as good as you think you are." And so for those out there who say, "Well, I'm not as good as the next person," they're not as good as you think they are either. Like, the people who are humble usually are the ones who are really being held in higher esteem. So the idea that you need to have your 201 file on your bumper, it makes you more or less of a veteran, I think is crazy, right? It's okay to be humble. I think for a lot of veterans, I know when I first got out, I was working in the space, but I didn't really, I didn't s- have any military other affiliations. Yeah, I didn't join the VFW right away. I didn't check out the Legion. I didn't join alumni groups. I would go on to do that later because I missed the camaraderie.
Mhm.
And when I walk into that VFW that I'm a part of, one of the things I really love about it is we kid the Air Force and the Coast Guard, but nobody is really being serious,
Of
about
course.
it. No one, no one is, and it hurts sometimes. It's unfortunate. I hate when I meet a veteran and they're not VFW eligible.
Yeah.
And I'll explain to them, hey, this is part of the VFW, but there are other resources that I'm a part of. Let me bring you to these and let me take you to these because there's so much out there. Be proud of your service. The person who's anyone who I think is being serious about going after, I think they probably maybe lack some confidence in their own.
Mhm.
Maybe it might not be about their service, maybe about something else, but real people who get it, they want to say thank you for your service. They're humble themselves. That's what I would point towards.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Definitely appreciate that. Hopefully that inspires some folks out there.
You know,
You said something I really
another
wanna. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me also share. So living in Dallas Fort Worth area, one of the things that I've got to observe and will be really, it's really cool, is they're building a Medal of Honor museum in Arlington, Texas, and it'll be up and operational this spring. And when you meet someone who has been awarded the Medal of Honor, it's awe-inspiring. I mean, it really is. And I've had the privilege to listen to several of them speak now. And these are people who have the highest, honor out there, and how humble they are and how they talk about the people they served with and how important they were and how they don't make it about themselves, but they make it about everyone else. And if anyone could beat their chest and say, "Look at me and how great am I?" It's those individuals,
Mhm.
but you won't hear that from them. And I would say they are great examples. And when that museum opens, it will be a great testament to who those individuals are and what we should all be aspiring for.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one thing that's amazing about a lot of these Medal of Honor winners. I've joked about my own service and some of the others. Like no one at human resources specialist course at AIT is ever really envisioning themselves of being a future Medal of Honor winner. Like we're kind of brought like we know like hey that's not for us. Like we're that's probably not going to happen for us. And that's okay. We're here for something else. But when you actually look at the roll call, there's a lot of non-combat troops. There's a lot of,
Mhm.
from chaplain assistants to support logistics people, people that had that same mentality. You have to be going through AIT thinking, oh yeah, Medal of Honor, that's like super hua. Those are super hardcore. Like those are the elite. You think of the infantry. You don't
Yeah.
think of the
Yeah.
opposite of
You
infantry.
think
But when you actually go through the roll call, they're from every walk of life. Some of them
Yeah.
are their resume prior to that might be one that we would poke fun at, like super pogues and whatnot. But then they go
Mhm.
on to do some of the most incredible things that have ever been done in the history of the United States military. So as
Sure.
much as we poke fun and when there we have a lighthearted kind of silliness about the theme of this of the opposite of infantry, you bringing up the Medal of Honor side of things, it really goes to show what you mentioned earlier, even with the interviewing, it goes to that individual person. It's who you are as a person. Your job, your MLS, AOC branch doesn't define you. Another item that I wanted to mention, you said that meant some people have their whole file on their bumper sticker, and I'm sure you've seen both of these. Talk to us about your experience in running into people who being a veteran is their entire personality versus those who completely
Ye
dissociate and have basically you wouldn't know that they're a veteran because there are people on both extremes. And as someone who's been in this transition space, talk about some examples of some trends of what you've seen from those two extremes. What do you think leads people to those extremes, and how have you dealt with them as you've come across them in your job?
Yeah. So I tell people who are transitioning from the military and say, well, it's a process, but it's been a 20-year process for me. I still enjoy the veteran community. It's a shared experience. And I only did 8 years on active duty, and I've worked in the space, and it's been my profession, so I've stayed close to it. But I do think it's important to start to have a balance. And I went to a conference just today, and it's been a big part of my life since leaving the military. Is I've become very involved in the church where we live, and I don't. I think of myself. Hey, I identify first as a Christian.
Mhm.
That's my first and most important. Next is as a father, a
Mhm.
husband, and a father, and then as a veteran. It's
Yep,
and so I think you want to have some priorities, and for some maybe veterans even further down the line, maybe
sure.
code or manager or teacher somewhere, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I don't think we should. I think it's important to have priorities,
of course.
and to know where your priorities are. And it is difficult. I think more difficult for those whose entire identity has been wrapped up as veteran or as military. When they do transition, it's I think there's that's a harder transition because that's all they've had, and it can be, more difficult. But there is so much out there, and my hope is that, hey, those people will find them and find that next thing. For me, when I was college, I mean, my thing was football. I played first high school football for my country, to use Al Bundy in Married with Children's line. Yeah, but like I said before, too too small and slow. So you had to find that next thing. And for me, it was, hey, I'm going to do the military thing. And then after military, it was recruiting. And then I realized after recruiting, hey, maybe it's something else. I think it's natural for people to go through a journey where they see that at different times.
Sure. What about the opposite end of the spectrum where people get out and they fully dissociate, where they're like, I don't want, maybe they had a bad experience, maybe they had a falling out
Yeah.
with their command, and that's why some people get out due to poor experiences, and they almost don't want the veteran title, or they just kind of put it behind them. So
Well,
that's the other side of the
we saw
spectrum.
that. Right, we saw a lot of that with Vietnam veterans,
Hmm.
and so when we look back on that, and that population is in their 70s now,
Yeah.
and our veteran of foreign wars here in the town where I live in Frisco, Texas, we had the Vietnam memorial that travels, the wall that heals, came, and it was amazing. I've never been to the national mall and seen the monument there, but learning about it, but really was meeting veterans who said, I haven't thought about this and haven't talked about this. And I know enough of their stories, and from growing up with so and so's dad was in the Marine Corps, but he never talked about it.
Hmm.
And so we've seen that. I don't think that's healthy. I think it's understandable. I think a lot of times there, and I think the comment that I try and remember is, you just don't know what someone else has gone through. It's hard to walk in someone else's shoes. You really, you can try, but you just really can't have lived their experiences. I think you have to give people grace
Sure.
to just say, hey, look, I didn't have the same experience that they did.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to judge why they've chosen, this. I'm going to give them grace on it, and just realize that I haven't been in those exact shoes before.
Sure. Yeah, and I loved what you talked about of finding your tribes. That's something that I'm going through as I prepare for my transition. For the longest time, being a pro wrestling geek was one of the facets of my personality. But it was pretty much Army and recruiting and associated things. But now, as I get closer, like, I'm a professor, but that crossroads off because the class I teach is a DINFOS cohort. So I teach that my students are military affiliated. So that's kind of cool. As a fellow Florida Gator, the Military Alumni Association. So I'm finding these like really cool crossroads where it's like veteran adjacent. So it's my alumni, but it's veteran alumni. I'm teaching, but I'm teaching kind of military and military adjacent. So it's really helping me figure out who Kevin is outside of Master Sergeant Crowsyn. And I think I'm fortunate that I've had a lot of great leaders. I get opportunities to talk to people like you. And that I think that helps. I think the earlier that people start planning ahead, not only do I imagine that would probably help them in their careers post military, but also just psychologically. Do you see any sort of crossover between kind of psychological well being of people who are better prepared for the transition tying in with their professional preparation, or do you think those are kind of independent of each other?
Yeah, I So I'm the post surgeon
Hmm.
for our VFW. My major at University of Florida was health science education,
That's awesome.
basically gym teacher or health coach, and of course Army has me doing air defense. My career has been in recruiting, but I'm finally getting to use my degree in terms of, hey, how can I help members of this post with health and wellness? And September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. And so we're very much looking at, hey, well, what are some of the things that you want to be doing? And a lot of them have camaraderie, community, getting outside, not isolating, being physically active, being healthy, not abusing alcohol, not abusing other drugs, taking care of your mental health, and not ignoring it. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's indicators, right? There's a chart that says, hey, these are good things and these are bad things, and I think we kind of know what we should be knowing what those good things are, and that's what we should be moving towards. Is, hey, let me get to the side that's healthy.
Absolutely.
How can I be healthy mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, all those things, and so yeah, move towards that side of the chart, and watch out for your buddies too, right? Though, I mean, it's easy for me to say that from it's very easy for me to say that, but I know other people who are struggling, and I know that, hey, there's you got to look out for your buddies, and you got to check on them. And when you see them struggling,
Hmm.
you need to intervene. You need to ask, hey, are you okay? And
Absolutely.
and you have to ask that hard question. Are you thinking about doing something to hurt yourself? And you need to be, I think we could all be better aware on the suicide prevention stuff, because it's an epidemic nationally. The bigger problem in the veteran community, because we've at least all of us have gone through some type of training
Hmm.
to use a weapon. So we're not intimidated by it. We have oftentimes at least some type of understanding of, how to pull a trigger and what's going to happen. And we've been emotionally prepared for that possibility in our military career. So the reason veteran suicide is such an issue, and a lot of veterans have guns. We have the means, we have the training, we have that. We're much more successful in carrying out
Hmm.
a suicide attempt, and so it's even a bigger issue in our community. So we do need to pay more attention to it.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's obviously one of the dark side of toxic tribalism that can contribute. It's one thing to have the sibling rivalry, like you said, at the VFW, poking fun at the Coast Guard. It's an entirely other thing to belittle someone's service and to kind of put them down to a point that it's endangering mental health. There's definitely a line that can be crossed. One way that a lot of groups are able to help with that line is by embracing the silly side and being just kind of accepting the reality of, hey, maybe it wasn't all that good, but we can laugh at it. If we take it too seriously, there can be serious consequences. So, on that note, to segue over, I want to kind of get some of your stories of what is just, some of the most ridiculous stuff that you've seen tied to whether it be the veteran community or military bureaucracy. And is there any sort of like movies or TV shows or pop culture that you've seen that's like, that's real life? I've experienced that. And something that people might not associate with, but you're like, that's 100% real. So tell us
Yeah.
some of the silly side that shows that we
That
can't be taken all
shows
that
that.
serious.
Yeah, humor is such a good, counter to the troubles. A lot of times, if if you can't laugh about it, if you can't make fun of, and I think it's important to make fun of yourself. We got so I think humor is important, and we like to make fun of others, but I think it's even better if we can make fun of ourselves. And the first boss that I had coming out of the Army was a officer who would tell this story when I first came to work. He said, "Look, every war story that I can tell you ends with, and then my blank adapter fell off." So he was Army Infantry Ranger, big, beefy, gregarious, and he could say, I none of that matters, and every war story I'll tell you ends with, then my blank adapter fell off. And I think it was his way of just saying, look, there's, don't worry about me being infantry. We're good. And he could make fun of himself. I said earlier, I've failed as many Army schools as I've passed. And to this day, do I feel bad that I didn't make it through Ranger School? No, that stopped a long time ago, right? I mean, when you become a battery commander, it's like, hey, I'm kind of past the idea of I needed to be a Ranger tabbed air defense officer for some reason. So yeah, it's good to laugh and make fun of others, but make fun of yourself too, because you need to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
uh,
love to
and
I
and
love
if
to
I were to
mention my one of my first big army tattoos. I figured I wasn't hardcore enough for like a real army tattoo.
like a real
So I
army.
have this like it's just a goofy monkey with like an old school Vietnam era K-pot helmet. Because that was my envision myself. Like I'm just a guy stumbling
Oh my
around with
goodness.
old reserve equipment. So that was my way of just kind of like even with my own ink to just like to be silly with it and just to kind of to not take myself so seriously.
I love to use the line when someone, well, what'd you do in the Army? As little as possible. Yeah,
That's a great
honestly,
one. It's a great one.
as little as possible.
Uh,
So, but you asked about a movie,
yeah.
and so Memorial Day. I think I grew up. My grandfather was a World War II Army Ranger. Actually, I mean, I went to memorial services as a kid, and my family definitely instilled the patriotism. And I do think Memorial Day is a very important day. We need to honor those who gave that last full measure of devotion, the people that gave their lives,
Mhm.
that sacrificed and sacrificed for us. So I think Memorial Day is very important for that reason. But it's Memorial Day evening. My wife and I are at home are like, let's watch a movie that's a war movie, but maybe is a little lighter and a little funnier side. And there's some great ones out there, right? Stripes and
Yeah.
comes to mind. But we watched one that's new called The World's Greatest Beer Run. And it's a Vietnam era story of a merchant marine. So that again, you talk about, are they really military or not? Right? Merchant Marines. Yeah. They are on a ship bringing goods and supplies to Vietnam. But he jumps on a ship to go bring his buddies in that are serving in Vietnam, bring them beer to let them know that the old neighborhood was still thinking about them. And so that it's based on a true story, very entertaining, not traditional. But my wife asked me after the movie was over, hey, what did you think? And I told her, I said, there was a part of the movie where I really related to, and it's he's in Vietnam and he's trying to get to these different outposts where his buddies are, and he's getting on military aircraft to go from site to site. So, as a battery commander in Afghanistan, I had platoons that were at 3 different locations, and I remembered that movie just jarred a memory that my first sergeant was like, anytime we needed to get something to them, part for a weapon system or some type of supply, if you told the pilot of the helicopter, hey, take this, it's got mail in it, for the pilots would always let mail go. Like no pilot would ever say, oh yeah, we can't take that bag. If it's got soldier mail in it, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And I remember sometimes like I probably conned my way onto a few flights with saying, I'm bringing mail and I just wanted to go visit them, but I'm bringing the mail. So they had to let me on there. And yeah, I think some of the funnier things that you think back on in your service time are the ones that are probably the better memories anyway. So again, find some humor out there.
Absolutely. And that's a great kind of segue to the final topic that I always like to address is, as we were mentioned before we started recording, today's culture has some unfortunate side effects of there's people dive into the far ends of the spectrums on things. There's a lot of folks that are really tribalistic, not in a good way. You had mentioned, hey, you have your faith, you have your service affiliations. Some people can obviously, as with anything, there can be too much of a good thing. And some people are kind of becoming hyper polarized in a variety of different things. And unfortunately, it's starting to become more prevalent in the online community where veterans are kind of belittling and attacking veterans, denigrating the service of others, whether it be due to politicians, whether it due to be their faith backgrounds. And it's unfortunate because when we're in service, we all join together regardless of backgrounds and other affiliations. But as you mentioned, as you get out of service, you have to have you have your other groups, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like we're starting to cross lines to where certain minority elements of veteran community are starting to kind of cannibalize each other. And we have enough to deal with fighting for better pay, fighting for veterans benefits, for the VA healthcare. There's a lot that we should be united over rather than attacking each other and tearing down the service of others. So I'd love to just kind of to get your thoughts on this idea of toxic tribalism within the veteran community. If there's elements that you've seen, and ultimately, how can we combat it? How can we make sure that we remain kind of unified in our service?
Yeah, a friend of mine who we worked together for a number of years. He was Army veteran, 101st, and I remember him saying, I think he heard it on a podcast or heard it from someone, but I remember it really stuck with me. He said, "The we can be our own worst enemies to each other. Like nobody will tear down a veteran more than another veteran. It seems like, and yeah, I think those leaders who didn't tear me down when I was leaving the Army after 8 years, and they had invested in me, and they could have been toxic and made me feel bad about that decision, but they didn't. They were kind. They were appreciative of what I did do, and that was it. And I think it's important to understand when people are joking, right? Like
Yeah.
if I call you a leg,
Yeah.
it's really not. I'm not serious about it. It's
Yeah.
it's fun,
Not
but
attacking
I
my
don't think
personal character. We're just, yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
So, but some of the spats that I see people get into, and I look, I'm going to make a comment and then I'm going to leave it alone. Like
Sure.
I'm not going to get. I don't want to engage in an online fight. I think uh, we would do so much better if we didn't hide behind keyboards.
Yeah.
With our brave comments so much. If you I think of idea that if you were to ever attack in some of the units that I was in, if you were going to make fun of them, they were some of the biggest dudes we had, and we're some of the strongest guys we had. And like, really, you want to go after the mechanic because he's not combat arms? You'll be missing a few teeth when it's over. Yeah, but we'll do it online, and I think one, let's stop being each other's enemy. It's fine to be a little jocular and have a little fun within reason, but I think also then don't let it become an attack. And if someone takes offense, you don't have to engage in it. I think it's just, hey, have some kindness. Be appreciative of everyone has done some, and if the Medal of Honor recipients can stand where they're at and say, hey, these are the guys and these are the gals that I served with, and then we all can do that, right? We don't need to go bashing each other. Let's just say, hey, it's okay. We don't need to tear everybody down.
Absolutely. Great thoughts. Appreciate that. As we wrap up here, I definitely want to thank you for coming on again. Definitely, I'm appreciative of your support. I learned a lot from this. Like I said, I'm a transit long-term transitioning over the next 2.5 years as well. And also, I know you spoke to the values of being humble, but you are a rock star on LinkedIn. You have a massive following. You're a widely respected member of the veteran community, a widely respected thought leader. So the fact that you're taking the time to be on this, which is essentially a brand new show coming out, definitely means a lot to me, especially given your stature on the platform and in the veteran community. So I'm very grateful of your time and your thoughts and expertise, because this is OJT for me as as I prep for my
Well,
transition.
if you were Florida State, I would have I would not have agreed. So
Go,
let's make sure we're very clear.
yeah, go
And
Gators
I have a
there.
bunch of Seminole friends that will probably roll their eyes when they hear me say that, but
Yeah.
let's be honest. So
So how can people find you if they want to connect with you, follow you? Where are the best places? Obviously, LinkedIn. Tell us more about where they can follow you and learn more about you.
yeah, LinkedIn is a fantastic place to find me. I will be on LinkedIn. Connect or follow me on LinkedIn. Send me a connection request. If you are a veteran, I don't care where you served, how you served, what you did. If you're a veteran, I will connect with you. And if I can help you at any time, even if I not the right resource for you, maybe I can point you in a direction. So the easiest place and most consistent place for people to find me is using LinkedIn. And I think most people at this point are on LinkedIn or at least can find it. So
Yep, and it's free for veterans. They just updated it. It used to be free for a year. Now it's free permanently. So that's a big change. So we encourage everyone hop on, connect with Dan, and again, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great chat, a very eye-opening, great learning experience, and I hope to have you on again sometime.
you're welcome, Kevin. Thank you again.
All right, take care.